Hey, what's going on? Hope you're having a great day today. So for this video, I just wanted to make some clarifications and some revisions to my last video about the fourth dimension, because there were some things I could have been a little bit more clear about and that I just kind of would like to put out there. I would like people to know and to consider. So this will be kind of almost a part two, just a little bit of an addition to that last video. And I'm gonna put chapters on this video, so if there's anything specific that you're interested in, you're welcome to skip around a little bit. And I'm gonna have to take half a second just to talk about that last video. So if you're just interested in the content, then you're welcome to skip by this. I'll put a timestamp on screen, and there should be chapters in the video to show you where to skip to as well. So first of all, I just have to say a huge thank you to everybody who watched that video, to everybody who commented, everybody who liked it or shared it with anybody. There was a bunch of people saying that they shared it with their friends and family, and that's really awesome. It's really cool to see people resonating with something that I made in that way, you know. And I was not expecting that video to do what it has done. I mean, when I'm recording this right now, it's sitting at 140,000 views, and that just blows my mind. I mean, when the video hit 10K views, I was like, man, this is fucking crazy. And it's tenfold now, and it just keeps going up. I mean, it really is crazy to me. And it's really such almost a liberating feeling to put something creative out there that was just purely what I wanted to make and to have it resonate with people. So thank you so much to everybody out there for all of your amazingly kind words, and to everybody that gave any sort of constructive criticism or anything like that. There were definitely people who pointed out some stuff, and that's why I wanted to make this video. But that stuff is really greatly appreciated as well. I want to get better at this, so I do appreciate if you have anything to add to the conversation, please do. I would love for that. But yeah, just thank you so much for that. I'm sure I'll talk a little bit more at the end of this video. I'm gonna leave it there for now so we can actually get into the content, but thank you very much. I really appreciate it. So the first thing that I wanted to clarify is what I was attempting to do with that video, because I was trying to make it a little bit of a narrative, kind of a story, a circular sort of thing. And I think that I just was a little bit not super clear about that. So I just want to very plainly state what it was I was trying to accomplish with that video. So my goal with the video was to, first of all, of course, introduce you to the idea of a fourth spatial dimension and how it functions and how we as 3D beings can kind of try to understand it a little bit. And then using that idea of how higher dimensions work, kind of introduce you to the idea of space-time, which basically teaches time as a dimension. However, it is a temporal dimension, and there were some people making some comments about that. So I did state that a spatial dimension and a temporal dimension were fundamentally different, but I think I really should be clear, we really don't exactly know what the temporal dimension that we have in our universe even really is. It very much functions like a dimension, but it's also totally possible that it's not a dimension and it just appears that way. We don't really know right now. I'm sure that we'll know eventually, maybe not exactly, but we'll at least have a better idea of what it is. You know, science will continue to progress. But it's very important to note that these are two different concepts and they're not necessarily interchangeable, but they are definitely related. And I personally found that understanding a fourth spatial dimension was very helpful to kind of approaching the idea and the concept of space-time. Now, our best evidence points to it being a dimension of sorts, but again, that's just our best evidence. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the way that it is. And that brings me into my second point here, and that is that all scientific theories are wrong. If you take a look at any of our scientific theories and you really dive really deep into exactly what they are and what they describe, they're always based on truths that we can't fully prove. We don't know the nature of our universe, of our existence, of why we're here. So scientific theories aren't really an explanation for why. They're just a way of understanding our universe and the patterns that it has, even if we don't understand what those patterns are really actually caused by. And a really glaring example of this is gravity. So of course, we can understand how gravity functions, and this is really useful for us. It allows us to do things like predict orbital periods, predict solar eclipses, and do things like go to the moon. And we're able to describe and calculate how gravity functions extremely accurately, and yet we have no idea why it exists. We don't have an explanation for gravity. So you might remember from the first video, I mentioned the Standard Model and the Theory of Relativity, which are our two best theories of describing the universe, and the concept of gravity is vastly different in both of them. So the Standard Model, for example, is an equation which attempts to describe all fundamental particles in our universe. And it's a quantum model, so it basically uses quantum physics to understand and to describe these particles. But when you try to make a gravity particle, which would be called a graviton, it doesn't work. When you plug into the equation, it gives mathematical infinities and inconsistent results. So the Standard Model does not predict gravity, which means it is 100% incomplete and incorrect in at least some ways. And the theory of relativity doesn't even deal with quantum physics and describes gravity as a curvature of space-time, which is one of the reasons why these two theories are incompatible. So that means at least one of, but very likely both of these theories is incomplete or inaccurate. And it's pretty much certain that we're going to revise or throw out these theories altogether. And to be clear, this is like 100% chance the case. I just always personally have some slight convictions about saying that anything is absolutely going to happen, because it's always good to consider that you could be wrong. But I mean, we can observe that the Standard Model is incorrect because it doesn't describe gravity. So it's very likely that they're both, again, either inaccurate or incomplete. So even despite this, it is still useful to think about these theories because they're still useful for describing our universe. It's not like we should just completely throw them out because they're slightly wrong. We just have to take them with a grain of salt and understand that at any point we might have to throw out or revise any one part of these theories or the theories entirely altogether. But for example, we used to believe that all of the planets, the sun, and the whole universe revolved around the Earth, and that the Earth was the center of the universe. And of course, now we know that that's not true, but there were still parts of that theory that were useful. Like the idea that things revolve around something else. I mean, that was a useful idea, that was a useful concept. But it was still wrong in some ways. And actually, a little fun fact, the universe actually doesn't have a center to it. And I would explain that here now, but there's already videos that do a much better job, so I'll leave a link in the description to one of them if you want to find out why. But that theory was incorrect, but it was a necessary step towards coming to a better conclusion that described our universe in a better way. So these theories, they are important and they are relevant to our lives, but they're just a stepping stone on the path. They're not the end result. We still have a long ways to go. Okay, so next up is 2D and 4D beings. So in that last video, I used the concept of 2-dimensional and 4-dimensional beings to help kind of get an understanding of how those lower dimensions function and what it would look like if you lived in those dimensions. But first of all, we don't actually know if it's even possible to have a space with 2 dimensions or with 4 dimensions, those being spatial dimensions, of course. So using math, we can imagine what it would be like for these places to exist, but we don't actually know if they do exist or not. And in addition to this, if they did exist, then life in these spaces would either not be possible or would look entirely different to how we know it. And the reason for this is because the building blocks of our universe, atoms, are 3-dimensional. Electrons orbit around the nucleus in 3 dimensions, and the nucleus has a height, a width, and a depth. So if you tried to put an atom into a 2-dimensional space, it wouldn't work. You wouldn't be able to fit the whole atom in there. And even if you could, it wouldn't be able to orbit in the proper way. So whatever the building block of that universe would look like would be just completely different, if it's even possible to have building blocks in a universe like that. And for a 4-dimensional space, the atom would just become unstable and fall apart because it now has a new dimension to move in. The electrons wouldn't have a stable orbit anymore because there would literally be extra space for it to orbit in. So it would just become unstable and fall apart. So if it is possible to have 2 or 4 spatial dimensions, then again, life is either not possible or would look entirely different. So in my last video, I said, to the universe, there's no good and there's no bad. There are just things that are. And some people understandably took this as me saying that good and bad don't exist. So I want to clarify what exactly I meant by that. So in order to explain my personal opinion on this subject, I have to give you kind of a general idea of the concept of ontology, which is the study of being, and part of that is how we choose to break up our universe. A really, really great video that talks about the concept of ontology is vsauce's Do Chairs Exist, which goes much, much deeper into that concept. And if you watch that video, then you'll get a better idea of what I'm saying here, which I'll leave a link in the description to that video as well. But I'll do my best to summarize the necessary parts here. So chairs are objects that philosophers call ordinary objects, which are basically objects that very obviously exist. For example, this rock that I'm sitting on, me as a human being, the earth, spoons, forks, stuff like that, things that you deal with in your everyday life. But the more accurately that you try to define what these things actually are, the more difficult it becomes. For example, is this rock I'm sitting on here a chair? Well, if the only criteria we have is that it needs to be a physical object that a human being can comfortably sit on, then it's sort of a chair because it's not really that comfortable. But by that definition, we could call it a chair. But then of course that definition includes a lot of things, and a lot of things that we probably wouldn't traditionally call chairs. Like a rock, you wouldn't call a rock a chair, you would just call it a rock, and maybe it could be used as a chair. But if you want to make something that actually is a chair, I mean, does it need to have legs? Does it need to have arms or a back? If it does, then what constitutes those things? What counts as them? If you just continue asking these questions, I mean, you have to go further infinitely, and there eventually gets to a point where adding one atom to an object would make the difference between it being a chair and it not being a chair. And that seems really arbitrary and just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But if we really wanted to, we could probably get enough people together, and if we worked at it for a really long time, maybe we could come up with some sort of definition that we all agreed on that was at that level of accuracy. But even if we did that, anybody could come along and just say that they disagreed with us, and suddenly our whole idea is thrown out the window and we have to do something new. A kind of similar example to this is the coastline paradox, which basically the way that that works is if you take a coastline and you try to measure that coastline, how long the coastline is depends on the scale that you're measuring it at. If you're measuring a coastline by miles, you're gonna get a much lower answer than if you were by meters or feet. And the further down you go, the more accurate it becomes, but the longer that coastline ends up being. So it seems like there isn't really a solid answer to how long a coastline is. I mean, a coastline is a fractal. It's an object that you can zoom in on infinitely. But anyway, let's say, just for the sake of argument, that God exists, an omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient being. If God came down and he looked at our definition of a chair, would he say that it's correct? Well, this is just my personal opinion, but this is sort of the way that I look at it. So as living beings, we have a perspective or a bias in this universe. It's just inherent to us. I mean, right now, as I'm sitting here, I'm looking at my phone camera, and my phone camera is looking at me. Both me and the camera have a different perspective of the universe, which is like a bias. And the perspective that we have on the universe depends on many things. It depends on our location and the time, our past experiences, and our current knowledge. When you were a little kid, what you considered good or bad or things that you valued are likely pretty different from what you do now. So as living beings, bias is inherently unavoidable. It's just a part of us. And it at least appears to me that that is the main function that we have in the universe. Besides surviving, which we only survive so that we can have a perspective, so that we can observe, and so we can make opinions about our universe. So to me, that's what the function, or you could kind of call it like the purpose of life, like life as a whole. To me, that's what it is. It's to observe and to experience and to form opinions about the universe. So what I personally think is that if God came down and looked at our definition of a chair, he wouldn't say it's right, he wouldn't say it's wrong, he wouldn't say it's bad or it's good. He would say, if you guys are happy with that definition and it works for you, good job, that's all you need. If it works for us, it's perfectly fine. We're not correct, but we're not wrong either. It's just a way of breaking up the universe, and if that's a really useful way for us to do it, it's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. So despite this, I do believe that there is a general consensus of what good and bad is that spans across location and time, and is based on our own intuitions and values and just the laws of the physical universe. And I do believe that the universe has a tendency towards things like growth and love, which lead to longer and more observation-filled lives, which, in my personal opinion, generally leads to better lives, or at least slightly more than it leads to worse ones. But at least the way I look at it, good and bad are more of concepts, fuzzy general abstractions that are very useful to us, but are not necessarily one pinpointable thing. So maybe it does exist, but everything that I just described, for me, at my point in my life, that's just my personal way of thinking about it that makes the most sense to me. So this video has already become a lot longer than I meant for it to. So I'm gonna be a little bit concise in this next part here, but I will be making a video about this next topic in the future. I don't know exactly when, but I will go much deeper into this topic someday. So in the 4D video, I might have unintentionally implied or suggested that the universe is predetermined. Because if time is a 4D object that exists all at once, and the past and the future exist at the same time, then theoretically this could mean that everything that we do is predetermined and already exists in that block of space-time. But I actually personally don't believe that this is the case. And again, let me be clear here, take this all with a grain of salt. We don't actually know. The universe could be predetermined, but it could equally likely not be. But what I personally believe is that this fourth temporal dimension is just more complicated than we think that it is. And I don't necessarily think that it means that the universe is predetermined, but all I really think it means is that the past can affect the future, but the future can also affect the past. And I don't know what that would look like exactly, but I basically just think that our lives are they're not constructed linearly through time. they're constructed in some sort of higher dimensional way that we just can't fully understand. And again, I don't know what that looks like exactly. I don't know how that functions. I really hope one day that science will advance far enough that we can find out. But the last part of that last video was really meant to be more of a thought experiment, to give you something to consider that can kind of break your vision of reality a little bit. I thought that I had made enough references to the fact that we don't really know exactly what it's like, but I don't think that I did. And I don't think I should have been speaking in a way that like this means that your life is constructed in a higher dimensional way. It more means it could be constructed in a higher dimensional way, and that modern physics actually suggests that it's likely that it could be. But again, that doesn't mean that it actually is. Okay, again, this video has gotten way too long, so we're gonna have to wrap it up here. But once again, I just really want to say thank you for the support on that last video. I meant to get this video out a lot sooner, but to be honest, I've been in a little bit of a rut just in my life generally. And once I upload this video, I'm gonna be hard at work on my next video. So anyway, thank you for watching. I really, really appreciate it. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and peace and love. I'll see you later.